Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. I am your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very accomplished individual from Bangkok, Thailand, Mr. Richard David Haynes. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Richard is the founder and executive director of the Center for the Future. He's a fellow of the World Academy of Art and Science. He has predicted the impeachment of the president of Brazil. He's predicted the success of iPhone and Tesla. He spoke about Arab Spring before it happened, and he also predicted the release of Aung San Suu Kyi. He's currently talking about new capitalism in China and the threats to the European Union, and he has been described by Forbes as one of the smartest people on the planet. Richard, it is a pleasure to be speaking to one of the smartest people on the planet. Thank you for agreeing to speak to me.
It's a great pleasure. It really is.
Thank you. So let's start talking about Center for the Future. You say that your mission is to make the world work for everyone by reinventing systems concerning the future of humanity. Help me understand this statement with some examples or anecdotes.
Okay, yeah, the Center for the Future was really established as a dare from a philanthropist who said, why don't you stop writing and talking about systemic change and actually do something about it? Which I was offended, actually. I thought that was not a very good thing to say. I thought I was doing quite a bit in the work I was doing. But anyway, we established the Center for the Future. And our proof of concept project was an attempt to rethink democracy. We noted that democracy really isn't working as intended anywhere in the world. Politics has become divorced from good governance and is really little more than a narcissistic farce. Furthermore, the political class has now become the ruling class instead of being servants to the people. So fewer citizens like us actually have a voice in deciding matters that directly concern us. Power has been taken out of our hands. So after an extensive period of experimentation and analysis, we came up with a prototype which we called My Vote. Essentially, this was a product designed to eliminate corruption in governance, to democratize governance processes on the blockchain, but which was done for security purposes, and a voting app using a smartphone, which allows people to register their preference on any policy in real time.
Right.
So the idea of My Vote was that it could be applied to make representative democracy virtually redundant and restore a much more inclusive system of community engagement, to re-engage people in the process of decision-making. Yeah.
Very interesting. So, when I was reading about you, before I get into any further discussions on your being a futurist, who or what is a futurist?
Not me, that's for sure.
Okay.
It's a label given to me by others, which I disown. And it's certainly not something I would want inscribed on my tombstone.
Okay.
I think of myself much more as a nowist, in that I work within an expanded now of possibility that stretches from the deep past through the present into distinct kinds of futures, such as probable, possible, plausible, and even preposterous. Okay. So what I'm trying to do is play with this expansive space of the expanded now. My influence in the domain of futures studies, to be honest, has been minimal. But within the field of anticipatory foresight and particularly ontological design, fields which conventional futurists, I think, like to downplay, I hope that I'm making a valuable contribution. Some consider predicting the future a kind of irresponsible and even impossible task from the complexity of our world, while for others it focuses on short-term trends, like what we can expect to buy in the shops next year.
Mm.
I'm much more fascinated, if I'm a futurist at all, I'm much more fascinated by the deeper underlying code and cycles that keep us addicted to repeating the same stuff, even when all the evidence points to the need for us to change direction.
Fascinating. So, Richard, I've always been fascinated by people who can draw conclusions from what is happening in and around them for the future. My question to you is, as a nowist or as a futurist, whatever you term yourself,
yes,
is there some kind of a training that you went through to start saying that I can now draw the right conclusions of what will happen in the future? Or is it something that you were born with?
I've thought about this a great deal, and I've come to the conclusion that it's a combination of several factors. I started life in medicine, and I was also writing music, and both of those fields of practice allow you to deal with layers of complexity and understanding how to connect the dots, how to identify what matters are important and what are not, and how you can connect those and find patterns in complexity. I think that is a critical skill. So noticing complex patterns and how they interact to create consequences ranging from the predictable to the surprising, what is called emergence in systems literature. I think that's one thing. Secondly, I think it's an inclination to be able to analyze groups of dynamic events within their context. That's very important. Then it's an impulse to make better sense of the complexity, to understand and appreciate why things happen the way they do, and what could happen if they continue in that manner. But in terms of your question, I should probably add a cautionary note in that I only make, you've noted how I have been fairly successful in the public domain of predicting what's going to happen. I only make predictions when I notice that the same dynamics across a number of alternative perspectives of viewpoints all point to the same outcome if the drivers of that process remain unchanged. So the answer to your question, how am I able to predict the future, really depends on four elements, I suppose, that we build into the process of inquiry. The first is the use of proprietary algorithms to scan literally vast amounts of unstructured data, which is available in the public domain online. Secondly, qualitative feedback on that raw data and insights from a global network of trusted sources. Thirdly, the crafting of alternative scenarios using that information. And then fourthly, identifying the patterns that are forming across the entire range of scenarios we're working with. And as I said before, I will only make predictions if and when we see the same qualities, the same drivers consistently forming over several different narratives.
How fascinating, how fascinating. And this took me back to an article I wrote in the India's national newspaper in August of 2016, where I actually wrote an article said Trump will win. And when people asked me later why, I said, listen, I don't know anything. All that I was looking at was the geopolitical trends of the world moving to the right. So I was very fascinated when I was reading about you. But I'd like to now move on, Richard, and talk to you a little bit about some of the trends you have predicted and some of the areas that you're working on. You spoke about the success of the iPhone and Tesla. You spoke about the president of Brazil. You spoke about Arab Spring. What were some of the actions that may have been taken based on what you said or you wrote?
I would like to be able to tell you that relevant action was taken. But the truth is, I really don't know. Action is, as we both would acknowledge, action is usually divorced in time and space.
Correct.
From anything you hear or any advice you take or predictions. I would imagine direct or preventative action is quite rare. Often it's only possible to see in hindsight how we've influenced thinking. And I do recognize my influence in the actions of people I've mentored or organizations I've worked with and I've given advice to. But I really can't be accurate in terms of really knowing to what extent, that's happened.
Understand. But now let's talk about the areas you're working on now. Say, the new capitalism in China. I'd love to get your perspective on what do you think is the status of China with the 14, 15 countries it has boundaries with, and it seems to be in a conflict with all of them.
I think at a very deep level, I think what we've been seeing over the past 50 to 70 years is a gradual shift of systemic possibility and moral authority away from the West and the old empires of the US and Europe to the East. And in terms of the Eastern worldview, the Sinic belief system based on Taoism and reinforced by Confucian ideals really seems to me to indicate a potential future for humanity that is healthier than the worldview we've held in the past, which seems to me to be crumbling. So I believe we're at a point now where the old world order and even the old civilization is crumbling in on itself, collapsing in on itself. And we're seeing the emergence yet again of China and the East within that context. Now, because of that, we're going to see tensions between those two views and world systems, and that's inevitable. But I think, especially in terms of what's happening now in Europe, of course, with Russia and Ukraine, I think it's evident that that old values, old belief systems cannot be sustained. And that the future hope for humanity as a whole, the human family, has to be with what is happening in our region, and particularly with China.
Very interesting. And you also just spoke about Ukraine and Russia. And one of the areas that you are working about or talking about is the threats to the European Union. I'd love to get your perspective on the two countries, about Ukraine and Russia, and how is it going to impact the EU?
Well, we have to divorce that from the personality and character of the sociopath who is currently ruling Russia, because of his narcissism and also his idealism, which is to reimpose, if you like, or recreate an old world order in what was the old Soviet Union. But you have to bear in mind too that the US in particular and the West generally have clearly been baiting Vladimir Putin in trying to get him to make the errors of judgment that I think he's made because of their need to retain global and regional hegemony in the world. I mean, the US is really fighting for its survival of its own image as policeman of the world.
Correct.
And I think it's not doing itself good service at all by baiting Russia to the extent that it's got us to the brink of a potential tactical missile intervention, which I don't think is a good idea at all. There is good reason for Russia saying we don't want NATO to encroach any more on our borders, which
Correct.
they've been doing.
Yeah.
And of course, the treaty or several treaties have been totally ignored by the West, including Minsk II,
Correct.
which guaranteed the security of Moscow, Russia. And so we're being led into a situation which has been exacerbated by the US political agenda and its relationship to Russia, and also US and Western propaganda. There is no doubt about that.
Fascinating. And yet, what I'm hearing you say, Richard, is when you talk about China, which is going back to what I would call the old order, or the old civilizations, or India, which is a very old civilization, or if you look at Turkey, which is wanting to express or flex its muscles in the Islamic world, or if you look at Greece, or and some of these old countries and old civilizations, do you see a lot of the old 1,000-1,500-year-old civilizational values coming back into the world through these countries?
I do, and also I believe they have to, and also indigenous wisdom, which I think there is so much knowledge there that we ignore at our peril. One of the problems with the Western worldview as it's lived today is it's become very evangelistic.
Correct.
In other words, the West believes that it has the solution for all the world. And I would argue that we actually don't live in a singular world, that the various world systems should be able to coexist and coexist well. And a lot of Sinic, Indic, and indigenous knowledge would be very useful to us at this moment in time when we're faced with such existential threats as the cancer surrounding climate, for example. So I really do think they are going to reemerge and provide useful knowledge and wisdom for moving forward.
Wonderful. So I've got time for two more questions that I'm going to ask you and your views on. I have to ask you the question on the pandemic, which has impacted the entire world. Based on your research and study and your ability to actually collate so much data around you, what do you think is the impact of the pandemic now and in the future on world health?
Oh dear, that's such a complex question because there are so many different answers to that. I think we're still unsure and confused by what has actually been going on. There is so much misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories flying around in terms of whether this is a pandemic or not. And I think over the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see actual information or the truth emerge, which will contradict a lot of what we've been told the pandemic is all about. And so, we're really in a situation of confusion at the moment. One of the things that's obvious is that we're not prepared for future pandemics at all. And one of the things that was quite extraordinary about this COVID, the SARS-2 virus, was the speed and collaboration of the science communities to create vaccines in the time for emergency use, mind you, but only for emergency use. So we're still unsure of the long-term consequences of the messenger RNA platform. And that's a problem in and of itself. But we've proven that we can move fast when we cooperate instead of going through the normal channels of registering patents and then taking 10 to 12 years to develop a treatment or a vaccine. So I think it's given us lessons in terms of being better prepared for things like pandemics. But I'm not at all sure that we're anywhere near the truth of understanding what is happening to us right at this moment.
Well said. And Richard, my last question to you, and I'm going to come back to your role as a nowist or a futurist, and technology. How is technology aiding and assisting you in being able to scan a much larger amount of knowledge, information across the world, and helping you to be able to really say, this is what I believe could happen in the world?
Yes, technology is helping me enormously these days. I mean, the ability to use algorithms to scan large amounts of unstructured data, so that I claim to be able to talk about anything to do with the future. So clearly that speeds up my ability to do that. And then platforms like we're using at the moment, Zoom and Skype, also aid us to meet at any time for any purpose whatsoever. The convenience of that has been extraordinary. We really don't have to travel as much as we used to, given these platforms. So technology has become a real aid in that sense. However, I do see the evolution of digital technologies, especially the convergence of artificial intelligence, machine intelligence, robotics, nanotechnology, and biotech, as a double-edged sword. I believe that in the past, in history, humanity has co-evolved with the environment in ways where the tools arose out of that co-evolution. In other words, the environment changed, we adapted to it, and we developed tools to enable us to adapt those ways. Now, over the past decade and moving forward into the next 2 decades, humanity has stepped outside of that co-evolutionary process. For the first time, we have in our hands the ability to create and destroy life.
Correct.
We were talking before we started the recording of the dance of Shiva, the Lord of destruction and creation. And humanity has become a god. We have that in our hands. And what we do with that knowledge and with that capability is, for me, a real question mark.
Amazing, amazing. Richard, on that note, thank you so much for speaking to me. Thank you for talking to me about the Center for the Future, about the amazing work that you are doing. I mean, as you were speaking to me, I was just fascinated to see how you could actually talk about such a large number of different subjects in so much depth and so much detail. Thank you for talking to me about China, about the Sinic and the Indic cultures, and what's happening in Europe. And thank you for talking to me about technology. Thank you again, and good luck.
Ashutosh, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you for the interview. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website, www.tbcy.in, to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.